Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lisa Elvin Steltore, and I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler. Over the last few years, I have been devoting my channel to exploring two distinct groups of women. The first, Filles du Roi, is what I started with in 2021. These Filles du Roi began arriving in New France in 1663 to 1673, 10-year period where about 700 women descended upon Quebec and married and had children, and that was the beginning truly of New France. And the rest of North America would eventually have this as well because their descendants didn't stay put. And eventually I began the series Les Filles Mariées because these are the women that came before them, 1634 to 1662, and so their descendancy is even stronger. But ultimately, I want to make sure we honor each and every one of these women, and we make certain that we tell their stories and say their names and where they came from and what part of France or another part. Some have come from Belgium or England, different places, and we need to honor that as well. So with that being said, we will begin the episode 345, I believe it is, Marie Pelletier. But before we begin, let me show you ways you can really help the channel. Subscribe, like, and notify. Subscribe is really important. If you want to click that subscribe button, really important. The next three ways are ways to help the channel grow. We have memberships that start at 99 cents. It's in the notes. You can just click on that link. We also have a super thanks that you can see as a thumbs up signal, and you can give like a tip for the episode. I love those. And then I also have on my YouTube, on my Have Roots Will Travel website, a PayPal button. So you can click on that. A lot of people do that as a one-time donation as well. So whatever you feel comfortable with, it's great. And thank you so much for all of you who have helped thus far. And with that being said, let's get started and get to know our Filles du Roi of this episode. Today we're going to be looking at Les Filles du Roi, episode 345, Marie Pelletier. She comes to us from a viewer request, so let's get to know Marie a little bit better. Marie was born in 1651 in Montargis, France. Her parents were François Pelletier and Michel Le Charles. You can see that Montargis is part of the Centre de la Loire, region, and then inside that region we have the Département of Loiret, and you can see that Montargis is actually found in that little circle, and it has a population of about 14,000, and it is called the Venice of Gagne because it has canals running right through it and more than 100 bridges, so it's actually a pretty amazing place. Right in the center of town stands the Church of Saint Madeleine. The church was first built in the 1100s. That's almost 900 years ago. So Montargis may look a little like Venice, but its history really runs deep. And can you imagine how much the Saint Madeleine has stood? I mean, over all those centuries. It's just amazing. And the town actually became a Protestant stronghold under Renee of France, daughter of King Louis XII. She was a Duchess of Ferrare and a strong supporter of the Reformation. When she returned to Montargis, she opened her chateau to the Huguenot refugees. For many Protestants, Montargis became a safe haven in a dangerous time. Renee even protected notable reformers and gave them shelter when they were persecuted elsewhere in France. So while the Saint Madeleine stood as the Catholic center of town, Montargis was also known as a place of Protestant protection and resistance. So I think that that's kind of a neat juxtaposition, if you will, that she comes from this sort of conflict or conflicted area. And here's a little bit of trivia. Praline was first made here in Montargis during the 16th century, and the original shop is still in business here. And anyone who knows me knows how much I love pralines. Now, we have no information as to whether her parents were deceased, But she would arrive as a fille du roi on Le Jean Baptiste on June 30th, 1669. She brought with her a dowry worth £100. The groom that she would select and who would select her, his name, Marie Renaud, and he was born in 1641 in Alzare in France. His parents were Marie Renaud and Gabrielle Routy. Now, the Alzare is found in the region of Nouvelle-Aquitaine that you can see circled on the left. And then on the right, you see inside of that region the Département of Charente-Maritime. And inside of that region, you'll see little tiny dotted islands. Well, that's where he's from. Really, really, really remote. Particularly at that time, they didn't have a bridge. They now do have a bridge to the mainland. And the iconic Saint Etienne Church, which is an extraordinary tower. That tower was really designed to help the sailors and the ships, sort of a day mark. This is where we are, and it guided them for centuries. And today, of course, it remains as kind of a tribute to that maritime history. The houses that are the whitewashed houses, get that way because of the extraordinary surrounding salt marshes. And so I wanted to give you that. I just thought it was so charming. And this is where Maître would have come from. So let's have a look at his journey. We're not exactly sure when Maître would arrive in New France, but we know that as of 1666, he is listed as a domestic servant for the Jesuits at Notre-Dame des Anges, which was Charlesbourg. And so that was probably his 3-year or 5-year contract that he would have signed in order to come to New France. And as soon as he was able, he would then be able to finish up that contract and be free to stay in New France and get married. Marie and Maître would be married on October 7, 1669 at Quebec City. Now the family would settle at Charlesbourg, and let's talk a little bit about this amazing historical place. It was founded in 1659 and is one of the oldest colonial settlements. What really makes Charlesbourg stand out is its unique design called the trait carré. Unlike typical colonial towns, Charlesbourg was laid out in a perfect square pattern, with roads radiating out from a central church. This unusual plan wasn't just about order, it reflected the importance of community and religion in early French colonial life. So you can see the square in Charlesbourg, very, very distinct. The smaller one of Bourg-Royal, and then Petit-Auvergne was there as well. And the bottom is a aerial photograph taken in the 1960s. 300 or 400 years later, it still retains that basic shape. And in the 17th century, most people in Charlesbourg were farmers. They lived on long, narrow plots of land and supported the growing settlement of Quebec. Life was hard, but the community was tightly connected. Today, Charlesbourg is a borough of modern Quebec City, but it still preserves its colonial roots. You can walk the streets of the original Trait Carré, the square, and visit historic buildings and see how the past continues to shape the identity of this very, very unique place. Now, this church that you would see here, depicted in 1696, would have been the church of Charles Borromée, that they would have named it after a patron saint. He was a counter-Reformation comment against the Protestant Reformation. So this is where they would have settled. They would go on to have 4 children. Pierre would marry Marguerite Angélique Fanche, and they would have 1 child who did survive. Her mother was Catherine Souret, a fille du roi who we have not yet profiled. Michel would marry Marie-Renée Réaume and would have 10 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. Anne would marry Pierre Bourton and would have 1 child who did survive. And finally, Louise would marry Marie Pelletier and would have 9 children, all of whom would survive. Mathurin would pass away shockingly at the age of 37, just very, very early. And we don't know the circumstances of his death, and we don't have a death record. So we know that he would have passed away sometime between May and September of 1677. He and Marie would have been married but a mere 8 years at this point. And now we come to the second groom in Marie's life. His name was Pierre Canard. He was born in 1641 in a commune called Souzé-sur-Loire. His parents were Jacques Canard and Marie Levasseur. In case anyone is wondering, yes, Canard means duck. Now, he was born in the Centre Val de Loire. You can see it circled on the bottom left of your screen. That's the area in France. And inside of that area, we have the département or county of Indre-et-Loire. And it's a very small town in a very old region. And for centuries, the life of this village was really focused on the water. And flat-bottom boats carried goods up and down the river, and many families worked as mariners. Now, Souzé-sur-Loire really literally means the name of the town, Souzé, and sur-Loire means on the Loire River, so it is normal. The parish church that he would have been baptized in is Saint-Pierre. The church we see today in this picture was built in the early 1800s after the Revolution, replacing a much older one. But you can see where he would have been baptized, the location at the very least, if not the church itself. Marie and Pierre would be married October 19th, 1677. They would have one child together, Marguerite. We don't know what ended up happening to her. We probably believe she died in infancy, although she did make it to the 1681 census. So we have Pierre Canard, 40 years old, Marie Pelletier, okay, so there's a 10-year gap. Then her children, Pierre, Michel, and Louise, all from her first husband. And then we have Marguerite, who's 3 years old. They have 3 bêtes à cornes, 3 goats or horned animals, and 6 alpes, about 4 to 5 acres of land. Marie would endure another loss. This time, she had about 23 years with Pierre. He would pass away in 1700 at the age of about 59. Now, Marie's third husband, Jean Joubert, was born in 1642 in Saint-Aubin-la-Plaine. His parents were François Joubert and Jeanne Maillet. Now, Saint-Aubin-la-Plaine is a tiny village found in the Pays de la Loire region that you can see circled on your left. And inside of that region, we have the département of Vendée, that is where it's found. And this church that is here goes back to the 1000 year mark. It was renovated in 1200 and 1400, and guess what? In 2014, they're still working at it. I love how much they preserve things in Europe. And this is kind of an aerial view of this very small commune, but very pretty and pristine. Now, he did not leave any descendants with Marie, unless there are other descendants of Jean Joubert that I don't know of. I just thought it was interesting to look at this particular town and kind of honor it a little bit as his entry into Marie's life. And so Marie would marry her third husband on the 24th of September, 1703. Obviously, this was a marriage not necessarily for survival, as had been perhaps her second husband or a second marriage. This would have been one of companionship. She would marry Jean 3 years after becoming a widow. So I suspect she was used to being married and looking after someone. So this was truly a marriage for her own heart, if you will. But alas, she would not have a long time with her third husband. She would pass away about 4 years later at the age of 70. She died in the hospital in Quebec City. She would leave us, though, 64 descendants. What an extraordinary woman to have been married 3 times, to keep going no matter what. I totally, totally am in awe of that kind of courage. And, obviously it was a courage that came because she had to, but it was a courage nonetheless. And I salute her bravery. I salute her stamina, her endurance. And she made it to the age of 70, which is a remarkable feat during that time as well. So thank you, Marie, and your descendants, thank you too. We appreciate you and we honor your memory. And I also want to say thank you to my patient supporters and subscribers. You are truly amazing, and I love when I receive an email or a text. Well, not a text, but I get different messages through the messenger system. People will do that, and they will let me know if they need something or clarification. We're just engaged, and we're really trying to make certain that we have as much information as possible. You'd be surprised how many people have written me and said, "Oh, you forgot to say this," and then I'll put it in the notes. So someday, if I have all this time in the world, I might redo some episodes and get them. You know how it is when you start something. I look at my first episodes and I go, "Oh, I want to redo them." So thank you to all of you who have been there from the beginning. I appreciate you. And with that being said, we'll see you on the next episode of Les Filles du Roi. Until then, au revoir.